So first, let's talk about imports and gains from trade. Here's the thing. It's kind of important to understand the assumptions that go on here, because there's a lot of assumptions here that are not true in the real world. So part of the assumptions are that there are no shipping costs, that there are no barriers to entry, of course, but there's also no quality difference between an American product and a foreign product or something like that. There's also no country loyalty. So basically what this boils down to is if you are an American consumer and if you have to choose between something that costs $4 in America or $3.99 from China, you'd rather get the Chinese item because it's cheaper and you don't care about which country you're buying it from, and the quality is the same and there's no shipping costs and all that stuff, right? So those are the assumptions that go on here. So as a consequence, let's see what would happen when this is the market for cars. Let's say 100 cars are being sold in America for $20,000 each. Now, the weird thing is this: usually in most of everything we've seen so far, this point over here where the supply and demand intersect, that is the best possible point. That's where there is no deadweight loss. As we'll see here, there actually is going to be deadweight loss over here. But let's go step by step. So let's say you're at this point in the market right now where 100 cars are sold for $20,000 each. Now, what if the world price, meaning the price everywhere else other than America, is $15,000? So we can represent that by, a horizontal line just saying the world price is $15,000. Now here's the thing. Let's think carefully. If we now opened up our borders to free trade, what would happen? Well, if you're an American consumer, you're thinking, hey, should I buy a $20,000 American car or a $15,000 car from somewhere else in the world? Well, again, based on our assumptions, you'd rather buy the $15,000 car. So here's the thing. A common misconception is that in this market, some cars will be sold in America for $20,000 and some will be sold from the rest of the world for $15,000. But that's not the case. Every car has to be sold for $15,000, even the American cars. Here's why. Because if you're an American producer here, and if you decided to keep your price at $20,000, which is what it was before you opened up to trade, well then, you're going to sell exactly 0 cars because none of your customers want to buy it from you. They'd rather import every single car. So just to even match that, you have to lower your price to $15,000. So that's a key assumption that is going on over here is as soon as we open ourselves up to free trade, the producer's price gets lowered down to $15,000 as well. So this old equilibrium price becomes totally irrelevant. Now let's think about what happens to producer surplus. So the producer surplus, it used to be everything below 20 and above the supply curve. But now, again, they're only getting $15,000 per car. So the new producer surplus is actually only this much. So this is the new producer surplus. And now let's think about what happens to consumer surplus. Oh, and one thing is, notice that instead of 100, they're only making 50 cars now because that's their supply. If the price is only 15, they only want to make 50 cars because they'd only sell the other 50 cars if the price was more, because it costs them, because the supply again is the MC curve. So why would they not want to sell the 51st car? Well, it costs them more than $15,000 to make it, but they can only sell it for 15. So they'd make a loss if they sold it, right? That's why they want to stop producing at 50 cars. So, but now let's see what happens to the consumers. The consumers now, they're just looking into the demand curve. At a price of 20, they wanted 100 cars, but now that they can buy cars for 15, they want even more than 20, right? They want 130 cars now. So they're going to end up buying 130 cars. But here's a question. If only 50 are made at home, but the consumers want 130, how are they going to get the remaining 80 cars? Well, they're going to import them. So that gap is called imports. What would have been a shortage if this 15 were a price ceiling, which you can go back to the module for price controls if you need to review that. But what would have been a shortage under a price ceiling is actually now what you import. It's not that it's a shortage anymore. You can get it from the rest of the world. So you import the remaining 80 cars. It's really just that gap. And so then, if we want to find the consumer surplus, it's everything below the demand curve and above 15. It used to just be everything above 20. It used to be this area, but now they're only paying 15, so they have more consumer surplus, and they're buying more cars. So the CS is now all this whole region. So Let's think about deadweight loss. Usually, for deadweight loss, we look at, all right, originally you were here, your total surplus was CS plus PS was that big triangle. And then we look at, all right, well, what's it now? And it's something less, and however much less it is, that's the deadweight loss. But now here, we actually have more than what we originally did, right? So what do we call this? We have exactly this much more, right? Compared to what we used to only have this much, and now we have that much plus this much. So is that a deadweight gain? Well, not really. The way we phrase it is that we sort of recalibrate. Instead of this being the optimal point with no deadweight loss, this now, our equilibrium with total free trade, this is the point with no deadweight loss. So if you have total free trade and you let your customers buy 130 cars for $15,000 each, well then you have no deadweight loss. So in fact, here, if you were to ban trade somehow, so even if the world price were 15, but if you ban trade, if you force them to be at the domestic equilibrium where this is CS and this is PS, well then this much would be your deadweight loss because that's how much more you could have if you opened yourself up to trade. So here, if you are at this point, the name for that is autarky. It's a weird word, but some books and professors use it. But autarky is just if you're not trading at all, if you're, blocking yourself off from the rest of the world and only restricting yourself to that domestic equilibrium. So now let's look at exports. Exports will happen when the world price is actually above your domestic equilibrium price. So in that case, let's see. Let's say that the world price is $25,000 for cars and that the domestic price is $20,000 for cars. So what happens is now, if you're a producer in America, you're thinking, hey, rather than selling even some cars for only $20,000, I can sell as many cars as I want for $25,000. Again, that's a part of the assumptions that we make. So what that means is you're just going to set your price at $25,000, whether you're selling it to people at home or customers abroad. So $25,000, that's the world price. So the suppliers are going to sell at that price. So at $25,000, it looks like 130. So you're going to want to sell 130 cars, more than you did when the price was only 20. That you wanted to sell 100. But now if you're a consumer at home, you're also going to face a price of 25, right? So one theme here is whatever the world price is, the domestic price, when you're engaging in trade, will end up having to match that. And the original equilibrium doesn't mean anything anymore. So at a price of 25, the consumers at home, though, the demand, if you look at the demand curve, the consumers only want to buy 50 cars. And now let's look at their consumer surplus. Instead of everything above 20, it used to be all this. Now it's only this much. Now it's only everything above 25. That's the new CS. So they're worse off, clearly, whenever the world price is higher and you're exporting. Notice it was the opposite with the imports. With the imports, the producers were worse off and because the price went down to match the world price. And now let's look at the producer surplus. It used to be this much, right? It used to just be everything below 20 and above the supply curve. But now it's everything below 25 and above the supply curve. So now it goes up by this much. So the new PS is really this much. That's a PS. And that's a CS. So notice over here, if you were to somehow ban trade and be an autarky again, you're going to have deadweight loss, because in that case your surplus would only be this much. So you'd have this much of a deadweight loss if you were an autarky. And if you were here now, if you were to let free trade happen, even though the consumers are worse up, you have no deadweight loss, because that's when the total is the highest, because then all this would be PS if you were here.